This is all unbelievably fascinating. To tie Zarqawi and Bin Laden, and then I want to kind of rewind a little bit to your process into the unit. You know, obviously SEAL Team 6 got Bin Laden in Pakistan and Abbottabad, and they put together what they viewed was like the 23 best operators from what Red Squadron. They called it an all-star team, and that publicly and in books has been very clear. Like that all-star idea of we're just going to pick the 23 all-stars fractured that squadron because the guys who didn't get picked were like, what? We're not good enough. In the unit, I interviewed a guy from the unit and he talked about how like the idea of an all-star team would never happen. Like when you get to a squadron, it's like you're all capable. Do you agree? Like, does Delta have the all-star team, or if you're on a squadron and your number gets called, you're just going?
Yeah. Um, I think you told me when we get to the end of this discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about
We
SEAL
will.
Team 6 and
We will.
Delta. And I think that speaks volumes, right? You have an important mission and you have to pick the best of the best out of your organization because you're not confident in who you have, as your everyday bench. It would never happen in the unit. And again, I say it somewhat tongue in cheek. Like to me, that is a serious indictment on an organization that you feel like your organic troop or your organic squadron doesn't have what it takes to get a premier mission. So we would never even think of that. Now what I will say um, is there is a lot of personality. One of my jobs as an officer was to sell our capabilities, our troop, our squadron. So it's funny because when people think about the military and they're like, oh, the president told them to do that. Man, the president's not telling us to do anything. We're telling the president what we think needs to be done. It's a very, very different relationship. If you're talking about Obama or Biden or Bush or Trump or whomever, like you're briefing them and their people like, hey, this is the number one bad guy. These are the conditions, and you basically establish this contract. So you write a con op and it basically has the conditions where it's like if we can identify this guy and isolate him with these parameters, are you going to give us the approval to launch? So that's constantly in motion, you know, and I knew the Bin Laden stuff was brewing because that contract was signed, so to speak. Like there with the contract with the Obama administration was kind of signed that said if you guys are able to isolate him under these conditions, X, Y, and Z, and that's what we were constantly doing. I had some missions that were very, very sensitive, very contentious. And as the assault commander, it was my job to say, okay, if we can match these conditions, do you give us the go ahead? So it's not like the president ever wakes up and is like, I want you to go get Bin Laden. It's building, it's building, it's building, just like the Zarqawi thing, where it's like, hey, here are the 8 things we need. We call them triggers. These are the 8 triggers that we need met, and when we meet those triggers, you're going to say launch, and that's how it works. So it's a very, very different relationship. Where was I going with that? So I think that's one of those things that I think people don't recognize and realize is the president, even the National Security Council, they are taking your input. They're taking your advice. You're telling them what we can and can't do, and what that cost would come at.
That that is unbelievably fascinating to me because most people, like you said, they would think like, oh, it comes down like Biden picks up a phone, issues an order, and then all of a sudden these guys just disappear. But I do want to walk this back just a little
Yeah,
bit to kind of because that was all incredible, but I want to go back to kind of how, as an officer, when you go to selection, is it the same pipeline? Like you're in selection,
yeah,
OTC, just like if you're a regular, I don't want to say
yeah.
regular because it diminishes, but like an operator, is it the exact same thing?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes the unit what it is every NCO there knows I went through the exact same thing. I went through the exact same selection course. In fact, there's a little bit of added bonus that officers go through that NCOs don't have to. And then even in the operator training course, that year of training, you're doing the exact same thing. You're in the house clearing. If you're not staying with the stack, if you're not safe, if you're not clearing, you're booted. So as an officer, if you're not good in the house, you're getting booted, even though it really isn't my job, But that's the expectation. It isn't until the last week or two of the operator training course where you're actually expected to be an officer and they're giving you responsibility. Otherwise, you're kind of the guy back in the stack. And it's I would say it's a little bit easier as an officer, so to speak, because they're not as heavily evaluating you. Like I was never the breacher, right? I never put the charge on the door, because that's an officer is never. I shouldn't say never, but I wasn't evaluated at that, right? Because that was a guy when he crossed the hall, that was going to be his job. His job was that. So you were kind of a support element all through that time. And again, like I was talking about earlier with the Zarqawi event, because I was downrange in between operator training courses, my first experiences with Delta was as a number five. So in the teams, you've got the team leaders of one, the assistant team leaders of two, three, four, five. You're supposed to have five guys on a team. And because I was a battle captain in the talk, running the talk, when I wasn't working that, troops invited me out to just be an assaulter. So I held ladders. I was in the stack. So in as I finished the operator training course, or even before I finished the operator training course, I worked as a Delta Force assaulter for a trip and really got to see the inside baseball of how it all worked. And again, I think that's a testament to the training, right? Like no Delta Force Sergeant Major is going to be like, "Hey, Major, why don't you come and get into a gunfight with us?" If they didn't know, I was up to speed because I had been through the exact same things that they had been through.
In your mind, what makes a great Delta Force assaulter operator compared to, like you're just saying, you're not going to be expected to be laying breach charges. So what makes a great assaulter versus a great officer? Like if you were evaluating, this is what makes an assaulter A plus, this is what makes an officer A plus, what would those characteristics be?
Wow, that's a good question. Um, I think it's probably layered. So you have to know the tactics enough. You have to know what your guys can do and can't do, right? Um, and this was interesting. This we're there was a story I wanted to tell you that we're coming together with. So there was a mission that was so these other things that we talked about. Um, there are these guys that you want that you're trying to go after, and there are these guys that you're constantly telling the U.S. government, we need to get this guy, we need to get this guy, and here's why. And they're like, too dicey. Maybe it's in another country or whatever. And so these op plans, they travel between troops and squadrons. Just like remember when Bo Bergdahl was kidnapped and held as a hostage, going to rescue Bo, that that was constantly moving. There was always a troop that was responsible and staying up to speed on what are the conditions for us to go in and rescue Bo. That was one of those things again when it comes to the national will. It's like, hey, what's going to be the cost to go rescue this kid in Pakistan? And you're constantly having these discussions with the government on, hey, we think we can get him with these level of triggers, and those triggers just weren't met over and over and over. So there was this guy that we wanted to go after. He was running foreign fighters into Iraq, and the Bush administration finally said, "I've had enough. Go get this guy. Tell me how you're going to be able to do it, um, and tell me how you're going to be able to get away with it without with me, the president, being able to deny that we ever did it." Right?